Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. Welcome to another exciting live session of Avid Online. I hope you all have been staying safe, being well, and also tuning in to our live sessions and online live sessions and panel discussions, and also our Avid Online videos. For those who haven't attended an Avid Learning program before, a very warm welcome to you and a brief introduction about us, what we do, and about our partners for the evening has been pasted in the chat section. As many of you know, that on April 1st, Avid Online, our further digital learning campaign, was launched across our social media platforms. And the objective was to enable our patrons and stakeholders like yourselves to be connected and engage with a range of topics across the breadth of the arts. And the focus of this campaign was to get the creative community connected, facilitate interactions, exchange of ideas. And we joined a large number of institutions and organizations and cultural platforms who use the positive message of the arts and the boundless knowledge and inspiration they bring by going digital. Now, into our sixth month, we have curated and published over 120 programs and counting. Tonight is 123rd, a mixture of live sessions and Avid online videos. We're still going strong and we're very grateful to our speakers and experts who've contributed their voice and time and interest and has supported us in this endeavor. And also to you, our interested audiences who continue to come back and tune in for our live sessions, or check us out later at your convenience on our YouTube channel. And this kind of gives truth to our mantra that learning never stops. And that brings me to our evening session, which is our final segment and closing week of the closing session of an exciting virtual week of music appreciation, celebrating the enduring legacies, traditions, and cultures of Indian music. This thematized week presents a closer look at Indian musicians and music through the ages and its significant influence of various genres, styles, and personalities. I hope you've caught some of the videos we presented earlier this week. And tonight, the Royal Opera House Mumbai and Avid Learning present Appreciating Indian Classical Music, Classical, Contemporary, Continuum, an absorbing live session which will help you develop a ear for an immersive or this immersive art form, led by co-founder ArtLinks Learning, Sadhana Rao. Welcome, Sadhana. Thank you for joining us. For more about Sadhana, please refer to her bio, which has been posted in the chat section. This should have also been emailed to you with your confirmations. In today's session, Sadhana will draw upon her extremely vast experience and extensive body of work as a music educator to break down the fundamental elements of Indian classical music. As Sadhana was telling us, earlier, that this is an extremely ambitious project and long conference that she has specially condensed for us today. So we're privileged to have this opportunity and extremely, extremely excited. So please note the session will last 75 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A. Sadhana will be taking questions. But just to let you know, in case time doesn't permit, Sadhana has promised, she's very graciously and generously promised to answer your questions within a week, and we will send you back. So please post them in the chat section or in the Q&A box. The chat section will be disabled. On that note, over to you, Sadhana, and look forward to a very, very exciting discussion and presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Asad. A very warm welcome to all the members of the audience who signed in. I hope you and your families are staying safe, and our continued wishes for you to stay safe. Thank you, Sahir and Dhwani from the Avid Learning team for all the tech support. May I now request you to please put on my presentation. Appreciating Indian classical music, classical, contemporary, continuum. When we hear that exceptional classical composition, we could get transported to another realm. Softly sung lullabies caress infants to sleep. A plain chant, a bhajan, can invoke us to worship or just into a simple quietude. The idiom of compositions, the songs, the appeal of lyrics, its melody, its harmony, its rhythm, all of this gives such a full score to emotions and feelings and an allure to this art form. In almost every culture, we human beings are hardwired to listen to music and to create music. Over centuries, music makers, using the exponentially infinite permutation and combinations with just 7 notes, twirling it with the physics of sound, have given society musical repertoires. The Indian subcontinent has two legacies of classical traditions, the Hindustani and the Carnatic music tradition. Dhwani, next slide, please. The engagement cycle. Any normal cycle of engagements go through these pegs, bearing in mind the finite unit of time. As a practicing researcher, depending on the combination of tugs and pulls, melody, intellectual intrigue of a raga, wanting to be a participant in this art form, the cycle could be linear, multilinear, could go zigzag, or could crisscross. Each listener's path of engagement is as personalized as a fingerprint. While the creative process of artistry occurs within the boundaries set by the creator or the artist, the expression of art is manifested on a stage, a public podium. The expertise of the artist, the I beg your pardon, multi-sensory absorption of the audience, all this create a symbiotic relationship. It is in this two-way engagement and passage forms that the art forms lives, giving a complete toss to time. Next slide, Dhwani. Session navigation markers. A few words on the navigation markers. With the millennia of tradition, the endeavor of this session is to give ourselves a panoramic view from multiple angles. Each subject and subsection would lend itself to a zoom lens with some deepening interests. So in the next few minutes, we'll travel through centuries of tradition, myriad forms of the two genres of Indian classical music, the anatomy of music. A small rider, due to the time and technology constraints of being virtual, there are a few omissions, one of them being I'm not able to demonstrate the breadth of instrumental music through the musical renderings. My apologies. Next slide, please, Dhwani. Soundtracks of civilization. At a very fundamental level, as a civilization, we revere sound and silence. Sound basically forms into categories. Anhata, the unstruck sound of the cosmos, and the hum of the creation. Ahata, the sound that is struck sound that encompasses music. Both elements, texture, music, sound and silence. Next slide, Dhwani. The textures of Indian music have had the most unique root and roots, oral traditions. They have been the root as well as the root of transmissions. The texts listed on the slide are perhaps the earliest known music literature, and they read like original music score sheets. Of course, they were notated at a later date. The texts listed on the slides, I will just elaborate a few. So if you take the Samaveda is virtually a musical rendering of the selected mantras from the Rig Veda. The texts were taken, some texts were new in the Samveda. The texts were taken, rearranged, sometimes shortened or elongated, and various sound modulations were inserted. They were then enhanced by the interpolation of the music notes. The recitation was set to a very, very rigid meter with details of breath control. Music was considered to be a mnemonic device. If we take the Natya Shastra, written by Bharat Muni, it's an exhaustive treatise for the performing arts. It's really vast. Particularly for musical insights, the text highlights detailed and systematical music combinations that contribute to giving a very, very nuanced rendition It mentions the swara, it mentions how a drum should sound. Interestingly, the text etches a performance called the kutappa, which actually denotes an orchestra and goes on to detail the minutiae on how an ensemble should include a male voice and a female voice with 9 to 11 players, gender diversity. More importantly, an assertion is made that while entertainment is the desired effect of performing arts, it cannot and is not the primary goal. The primary goal is to transport the individual in the audience into another parallel reality, full of wonder, where he experiences the essence of his own consciousness. So if you look towards there, there's a document called the Sangeet Ratnakar. This is a really important 13th century document. The reason I say it's important because it's a very significant continuum. All the earlier references that I made are recorded in this. This was composed by Pandit Sharang who worked as an accountant and had the freedom to pursue his music interest in the court of King Singhanha in Maharashtra. The book has various chapters, but each chapter is fairly detailed. Some of the paddhatis we don't follow today, but as I said, it's a very good reference point. It's a reference point because it's a connection from ancient India to medieval India. It's a reference point because, please note, the music of India is still Indian music. It hasn't segued into Carnatic and Hindustani, so it's a definitive text for both genres of music. Dhwani, next slide. Please take a look at the map on the screen. Musical moorings. This map gets created organically during the Bhakti movement. The Bhakti movement was an important inflection point historically and musically. A movement which had started between the 6th and the 9th centuries in Tamil Nadu, swept across the country from the 12th century onwards and had lasting part till 17th, 18th century. This movement gave rise to many forms of music and amplified existing musical forms, as is evident from the map. We had Amir Khusro crafting the Qawwali, Kirtan, Gurbani, just showcasing Haveli Sangeet was the precursor to Dhrupad. This all is showing the plurality of the Indian tradition. There is also a movement in nature, the participation of the masses with the Bhakti movement. The poetry of Kabir Das, Mirabai, Tukaram, all is composed not in the Vedic language, but it is composed in the language of the people. The meter of chanting becomes simple. Further, most as if you see in the map, music gets geographical identity and moorings. It's at this time, 14th, 15th, 16th century onwards, that the two streams of Indian classical music come into existence. The music of North India is referred to as Hindustani Shastriya Sangeet, and the music of South India, guided by its foremost architect, Purandara Dasa, comes to be known as Carnatic music. The term Hindustani music is self-explanatory. A quick clarification on the term Carnatic music. It does not refer or relate to the state of Karnataka. A few reasons have been attributed. Some have opined that the region south of the Vindhyas was referred to as Karnatakam, hence the name. The word Karnatakam also means very old and was considered apt. There's yet another explanation that the word owes its origin to Karna, to hear, and Ata, to haunt. So it could well be the music that which haunts the ear. So you could make your choice for the most apt meaning. We now will take a break from the narrative origins of music and shift gears to the anatomy of music. Dhwani, slide change. When we discuss music in general, we refer to elements of music in terms of melody, rhythm, and harmony. Melody is perhaps the most identifiable element of musical composition. A melody is a series of notes played in an order that is easily recognizable. Rhythm is music's pattern in time. Rhythm is a way that music is systematically divided into beats and that repeat a specific number of times. Harmony in music is the sound of two or more notes heard simultaneously. When we speak of Indian classical music, the terminology used is swara, shruti, raga, tala, laya for both instrumental and vocal traditions. Next slide, Dhwani.
Sadhana, just
Yeah.
quick, if you could actually just speak up a tad bit more,
Okay.
or alternately just come closer to your head.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Sonic landscape. Swara is an individual note, a selected pitch. If you look at the screen, there are 7 such notes: Shadja, Rishabh, Gandhar, Madhyam, Pancham, Devat, and Nishad. They are usually referred to by their corresponding solfeges, that is Sa, Re, Ga, Ma, Pa, Dha, Ni, and again the repeat Sa. Each note is higher in pitch than the previous one. In Indian music theory, notes can be distinguished on the basis of the interval between each other, known as Shruti, so the distance between Sa and Re. The 7 notes, when grouped together, form something called a saptak or a sargam or an octave. Music develops in 3 octaves, and in Indian music, they are known as the Mandra Saptak, which is on my left, that's the lowest. Madhya Saptak, which is in the center, the medium, and Tar Saptak, which is to my right, which is the highest. In each octave, when notes are sung in an ascending order, that is from Sa, Re, Ga, Ma, Pa, Dha, Ni, Sa, that is called in Arohana. And when notes are sung in a descending order, that formation is called the Avarohana. Dhwani, please play the next slide. Am I audible enough?
Better. Thank you.
Before we describe the notes, give valuations, I'd like you to listen to a musical rendering. It's a Sargam Geet, where the lyrics are twirled with swaras to give you an idea. Among others, this composition Sunta Hai Guru Gyani was sung by Pandit Kumar Gandharji. The gist of the composition is the one anointed by the Guru or the learned one hears the sound of the cosmos. Dr. Radhika Joshi, who has learned from Pandit Raghunathan Panchikar, renders this composition. Dhwani, please play the music.
सुनता है गुरु ज्ञान 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 सुनता है गुरु ज्ञान 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 सुनता है गुरु
Dhwani, that was Dr. Radhika Joshi. Dhwani, next slide, please. If you notice in the composition, the artist's voice touched upon various notes in the octave, some visiting a higher note or some visiting a lower note. Two,
I think Bunny had a technical issue, so she'll be on in 2 minutes. But perhaps we can answer this one question, which is in the Q&A box. If you want to just take a look at it, it's relevant to this section, so might be a
so
good.
this particular slide that went away, if you saw, it says the range of the saptak. So if you saw the slide had the three octaves, and I'd put a bracket which goes between the octave. It goes from in the mandra saptak to the tar saptak. There's a range there. So it clearly depends on which song, which composition. And so I would say Lata Mangeshkar, I mean, I wouldn't like to comment on that, but I would say normally she would be at a G sharp, but that's not what I would like to get into. So I hope I've answered that question. I've showed it on the slide. I've showed the range. How are sharp or flat notes represented? I'm just going to come to that in the next slide.
Get
Okay,
back.
just 1 second. Somebody called Shiv Bhanap has asked. That's going to come. The next question is, what is Trital? That will come in the rhythm section. Okay. So I've shown if you look at the slide, there's a bracket there which goes, so that's what I've shown you, that's a typical human voice range. Next question, next slide, please. Now, this answer, vocal virtuosity. Vocalists M.S. Subbalakshmi and Pandit Bhimsen Joshi were known for their vocal prowess. It's the range that we were talking about. They could move octaves effortlessly without it showing or even on their throat skin when they were performing. M.S. Subbalakshmi, endowed with one of the most mellifluous voices. By age 16, she was performing at the Madras stage, and a performance career without a pause. Braving odds of orthodoxy of the times she lived in, never once shying away from her Devdasi roots. Her voice was her identity, a voice that she had trained with constancy of purpose. She stayed with that identity, sang every conceivable song form, bhajan, classical compositions, songs at the UN National Assembly, for films, for freedom. Her biggest contribution to the world of listeners was that you do not have to be a connoisseur to enjoy her music. Pandit Bhimsen Joshi was known for his deep, resonant, and flexible voice that allowed him to span an enormous range and depth on the octaves. It was the voice of Abdul Karim Khan Sahab singing Piya Bin Chen Nahi Avat that propelled him to being a musician. For a chosen path that he ran away several times from home, coping with the challenges that came his way. His biggest contribution to the world of listeners was the Savai Gandhar Music Festival that he initiated in memory of his guru, and he conducted it till the very last days of his life. Dhwani, next slide. Let's not rush so we don't lose the connection. So there are 12 universally identifiable notes in any octave, 22 points given by nature for the perception by the human ear. It's a dramatic slide. To get here, we look at the next slide. Dhwani, next slide. So there was a question about sharp and flat notes. I'll answer that in this slide. In my introduction, I had referred to the infinitum of permutations and combinations that you could have with 7 notes. We start to see that now with this slide. So the sargam table now gets further defined. the 7 notes become 12 notes. So the 7 notes, that is sa, re, ga, ma, pa, dha, ni, they are called Shuddha Swaras or the sharp notes. The sa and pa are fixed notes or called Achal Swaras. Re, ga, dha and ni have a note before them called Komal Swaras or flat. So I repeat, you have the whole note, the 7 notes which are the Shuddha Swaras or the sharp. Sa and pa in Indian classical music are your fixed notes, Achal Swaras, they don't move. Re, ga, dha and ni have a note before them called Komal Swaras or flat notes. Ma is the only note on the sargam that has a note higher than the original ma, hence it's called the Tivra note. Now if you look at the slide, in Hindustani you have 12 notes. In the Carnatic segment, the 12 notes can also go up to 16 notes. There's a mathematical valuation given there, Re1, Re2, Ga, that detailing depends upon the compositions. So a 12 note scale is called a chromatic scale. So from 7 notes, we've become 12. In the Carnatic tradition, 16. A 12 note scale is called a chromatic scale, which in Greek means all colors. So by dividing each octave into 12 intervals, the intent has been what? The intent has been to maximize the number of pleasing sounds to the human ear. In the Western classical tradition also, they have the chromatic scale, but the application is completely different. These two systems are really different because in the Indian system, the only tonic note, which is sa, is fixed. All other notes are in relation to this sa. Next slide, Dhwani. So we did the notes, the sargam, the saptak. Now the rag grammar. What is a rag? The simplest fundamental explanation is a series of musical notes arranged in a sequence on which melody is based is called a raga. Raga literally means color or coloring and is the melodic framework on which Indian music rests. So if you look at the slide now, there is a set grammar, and this is same for both forms. The rags have a fixed, unchangeable set of notes, whichever rag you take. In the next slide, I will explain it further. A set pattern of notes are there in your ascent and descent, which is your Avrohan and Avrohan. Rag must have at least 5 notes. There are, of course, exceptions to this. Balamurli Krishna, one of the exponents of vocal in the Carnatic tradition, has actually gone and composed 5-6 rags with just 3 notes. But he's innovative and he goes where very few people tread. Every rag must include a sa with a pa or a ma. Every rag has a dominant note called the vadi and a second important note called the samavadi. A rag cannot take a shuddh and a komal notation of the swara. That is, if you look at the, I'm sorry, Dhwani can't go back to the table, otherwise the system is hanging. But if you look at the saptak table, you had, yeah, thanks Dhwani. So the rag can't take sa, re, all the 3 re's in Carnatic tradition. And in Hindustani, you can't take komal re and shuddh re. It has to be one. That's the, depends on the composition of the rag. Next slide, Dhwani. Okay. Now we begin with what is called the classification of the rags. As in this case of the swaras, a huge body of work has been done to classify the rags. The note formations, the classifications have really been done for comprehension, relatability, for music to spread and to be reproduced. So the basic classification in Hindustani music rests on something called the Tat system or the parent scale. These are nothing but the tables of mathematics. The Tat table is an outcome of research done by Vishnu Narayan Bhatkhande, an eminent musicologist in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. There is an anecdotal data, not really verified by written data, but the reason that propelled Bhatkhande ji to go and do this was because he felt there was a lot of mysticism, a lot of secrecy in teaching music or giving talim, where a father would not give it to his son lest the music becomes better. So he decided to travel right across the country, musician to musician, north and south, to sit and understand how to standardize this system. So a thought basically refers to a basic pattern in which 7 notes of the saptak are arranged. It is from this pattern that the rag notes for the arohan and the avrohan are formed. So the way it works is there is a group of rags are based on one thought. In every thought, there is one rag that usually bears the name of that thought. A point an example, Bhilaval is a thought as well as a rag. The reason I chose to explain Bhilaval because it's a rag which is not performed frequently, but the Indian national anthem is structured around this rag. The rags in Bhilaval thought are Bihag, Pahadi, Deshkar, Durga. Now, there are shortcomings to this classification. Theorists are divided on this efficacy. There has been a volume of work done, but this still remains a very good reference point. That was Thoughts of India in Hindustani music. Dhwani, the next slide. Samay Chakra. In Hindustani classical music, each rag is rendered at a specific time. So, if you remember, as students of music, we are supposed to make a bookmark of the saptak and carry it with us. So, if you see the saptak, sa, re, ga, ma, pa, dha, ni, sa. The time of the rag depends on the vadi swara, the dominant note I mentioned in the rag grammar. So, if the vadi swara of the rag is from from the sa to the ma, which is the earlier part of the saptak, it's called a purvang part of the saptak. Any rag which has its vadi note in that part is called a purvang vadi rag, and this rag is sung anytime from 12 am to 12 pm. If the vadi is from ma to the higher sa, it is called the uttarang part of the saptak, and these rags are called uttarang vadi rags and are sung from 12 pm to 12 am. The classification then gets a little bit intense. For instance, you have rags of belonging to the Malhar category. They can be sung any time of the day during the monsoons. There are rags for dawn, for dusk, and so on. Next slide, Dhwani. As in the Hindustani system of the Thaat, of the Samay Chakra, in the Carnatic tradition, you have a classification of rags done much earlier called the Melakarta system or the Melakarta Chakra, which encompasses 72 rags. The Mela systems of the rags was propounded by Ramamatya around 1550. He is considered the father of the Mela system of the rags. In Hindustani, it was done in the early 1900s, and Bhatkhande ji has studied how it was done in the Carnatic system. So the Melakarta is really a collection of fundamental music scales. They call the parent ragas, also known as the Janak ragas, or ragams, from which the ragams may be generated. They are all Sampurna ragas. They contain all the 7 swaras of the octave in both in the ascending and descending order. Many other ragas are derived from this. This looks complicated, but it is mathematical. And for someone like me, who maths was not a strong point ever, with a very little guided effort, I can read the pattern, so anybody else can. Next slide, please. The framework of raga grammar is what facilitates the flow. It allows you to fly in the raga exploration. So let's leave the math behind right now and we bring you a musical rendering of poet Kabir Das's verse, Jis Dise To Nahi. This is in the Carnatic style rendering. The composition here, if you look at the chart, is in two rags, Rag Shankarabharanam and Rag Shankarabharanam, which is the equivalent in the Hindustani, is Rag Bhilaval. In Western music, it is the Western C major scale. And the artist will transition to another rag called Maya Malava Gola Ragam, a soothing rag that corresponds to the Bhairav rag in the Hindustani tradition. Both these ragams, because of their symmetry, are among the first ragams to be taught to a student. The gist of the composition is, what is seen is not the truth. What is cannot be said. Trust does not come with seeing. The artist is Bhargavi Venkatram, a noted vocalist, who is a student of T.M. Krishna, a noted Carnatic vocalist. Dhwani, please play the music.
जो दिसे सो तो है नहीं, जो दिसे सो तो है नहीं, है सो कहा ना जाए, है सो कहा ना जाए, बिन देखे प्रतीत ना आवे, बिन देखे प्रतीत ना आवे, कहे ना कोई प्रतिज्ञा, कहे ना कोई प्रतिज्ञा, समझो ये तो रबी चीनो, समझो ये तो रबी चीनो, समझो अचरज हो ये अचरज हो
That was Bhargavi singing. Now, maintaining fidelity to the rag grammar, lacing the ragam notes with lyrics of the composition, the singer establishes her relationship with the ragam. How does she do this? Or her? By modulating their voice, staying on the swara, as what Bhargavi was doing, emphasizing a swara, singing on the swara, and one can use various forms of embellishment. So I'm going to detail a few. The ornamentation of the rag is by a trick called the gamaka. It's a technique, and it takes a fairly long period for us to learn that. So you have a gamaka called dhalu. That is, you start from a lower note, or say the base sa, depending on the mood that you want. You move with that to a higher note. Another gamaka is andola, which means a swing. That is, movements of various notes in a swinging fashion. You have another gamaka called kapitatam, which is oscillating on the same swara without mixing it with its preceding or succeeding notes, as what Bhargavi was doing. Dhwani, the next slide. We now have a musical rendering in Hindustani tradition of poet Kabir Das's verse. The composition is sung in Rag Bagshri. It's a popular rag of the late night, which is meant to depict the emotion of a woman waiting for the reunion with her lover. It was first sung by Mia Tansen, the celebrated court singer of Akbar in the 16th century. The gist of this composition is: childhood is spent in play and youth is spent in pursuing wealth. For many reasons, the essence was lost, and even today there's desire in the mind. And like saints, we have to transcend this. Dr. Usha Arunachalam, an exponent of the Shamlal Rao Gharana, will render a composition in Rag Bageshwari. Dhwani, please play the music.
बीत गए दिन भजन बिना रे, बीत गए दिन भजन बिना रे, बाल अवस्था खेल गवाए, बाल अवस्था खेल गवाए, जब यौवन तब मान धना रे, जब यौवन तब मान धना रे, बीत गए दिन भजन बिना रे, लाहे कारण मूल गवायो, लाहे कारण मूल गवायो, अजहु न गई मन की तृष्णा रे, लाहे कारण मूल गवायो, अजहु न गई मन की तृष्णा रे, कहत कबीर, कहत कबीर, कहत कबीर, कहत कबीर, सुनो भाई साधो, कहत कबीर, सुनो भाई साधो, पर उतर गए संत जना रे, पर उतर गए संत जना रे,
Thank you. That was Dr. Usha. Just one question I have for Dhwani and Sahil. If you can just stop sending the questions on the WhatsApp. I keep looking to see whether there's some urgent message you need to send to me. Let's keep that for communication, otherwise I get distracted. I'll just answer one question. There was a question that said, give us an example of a Vadi and a Samavadi. So for Rag Yaman, the Vadi is Ga, and and the Samavadi is Na. So just put all these questions and I will take it up later. So that was Dr. Usha singing Rag Bhagishri. Now this is in the Hindustani tradition. So exactly, you had the Gamakhas in the Karnataka tradition. You have the same techniques in Hindustani music. So what could you do? You could do something called a khata, which is what she did, a faster glide to attack the principal note. You could do a meend, which is a slow glide connecting two previously expressed notes. Or what she did at 3-4 places where it was just a tehrav, staying on that note. Staying on that note, the raga is both about melody and emotions. The emotional essence of a rasa is another element. It's a kind of a contemplative abstraction in which human beings feel suffuse the surrounding. An artist delves into the inner meaning of the atmosphere he or she chooses to imbue and covers the varied emotions that a rasa theory classifies. There, the rasas can range from Shringaram, that's romance, love, Hasyam, laughter, mirth, comedy, Raudram, fury, Karunam, mercy, Bhayanakam, that is terror, Veeram, that's heroism, Adbhutam, wonder or amazement. So both, it really depends on the realm of, so we've left the science and the maths behind. It's a framework that's given to you. You don't question why 6 times 6 is this. That's the framework that's given. Now, along with that, you move to do your ornamentation, how you want to interpret the mood. Dhwani, next slide, please. So, raga exploration. You have the same notes from this is in the Hindustani tradition. You have the same notes, two different ragas, two different parent scales, but the same notes, Rag Bhopali and Rag Peshwar. They share the same tonal material, but the note treatment and its melody, how it progresses, is different. So in this, the artist is not going to sing the rag, she is going to sing how the notes move. In a practice, it's called rag ki pakad. That is, how do you catch the notes of the rag? Meetu Banerjee, trained from the Kausar Patiala Gharana and the Bhetia Gharana, renders the notes. Vani, please play the music. Dhwani, there are two tracks.
Sa re ga pa dha sa, sa dha pa ga re sa, dha pa ga pa dha pa ga re sa, ga pa dha pa, sa re ga pa dha pa dha sa, re sa dha dha sa, re sa dha pa ga, sa re ga pa dha ga pa dha.
Dhwani, play the second track.
Re ga pa dha sa, sa dha pa ga,
So that was the artist showing you Rag Deshkar and Rag Bhopali. Same notes, different hearts. That's the magic of the Rag. And she showed the emotion just through the notes and nothing else. Next slide, Dhwani. Are we not formed as notes of music are for one another, though dissimilar? The Shelley quote is just so apt. Music and lyrics are like siblings. They share the DNA of a creative process and yet are different with their extremely distinguishable features. As Hindustani and Carnatic music get entrenched in their territories, so does the specificity of the language of the lyrics. This has a direct bearing on the music. I'm going to spend a few minutes on this slide to give you a background score to show you the movement in music. Both Hindustani music and Carnatic music are entrenched by 16th, 17th centuries. The Carnatic tradition of language and lyrics gets layered with signatures of its founders, Purandara Dasa, and the triumvirate of maverick composers. Purandara Dasa was a musician himself. What he did is he codified Carnatic music, how it should be imbibed. He created early learning paths, establishing a musical pedagogy. For its inclusion, he introduced folk rags into mainstream classical music. His compositions were in in Kannada, I'm sorry. And it's believed that Mia Tansen's teacher, Swami Haridas, was his student. The holy trinity of composers, that is Shyama Shastri, Tyagaraja, and Muthuswami Dikshitar of the Carnatic tradition are really referred to as the trinity of Carnatic music. All three of them were musicians, so they could instinctively write the lyrics that could be set to music. Shyama Shastri, the oldest of the three, composed more than 300 songs in Telugu. Tyagaraja, a composer of more than 1,000 devotional songs. Muthuswami Dikshitar composed most of his works in Sanskrit and in a combination of Tamil and also in Tamil, I'm sorry. Muthuswami Dikshitar undertook a project to compose in all the 72 ragas of the Melakarta system. So Carnatic music has got textured by devotion, piety of the compositions. Up north in the Hindustani tradition, the forms of music are becoming specific. Dhrupad, which was already there, Khayal Gayaki, and Thumri. The pristine form of Dhrupad, as per the oral tradition, is said to have descended from a form known as the Prabandh, which is a fixed composition, sung only in devotion of gods and performed in temples. The Dhrupad shares its intrinsic piety and purity with its Carnatic cousins. It is in the 15th century that in the court performance of Gwalior in Raja Mansingh Tomar's court, that it gets established as a genre in the Mughal court. Originally, it was composed in Sanskrit, Hindi, and then Braj Bhasha. So you see a movement of language happening. The term khayal in Khayal Gayaki comes from Persian word meaning thought, idea, conception, imagination. Unlike Dhrupad, where it is only in praise of Lord, the Khayal compositions cover a diverse range of topics along with the praise of gods and kings. Now stories of lovers, separation of lovers, stories from dawn to dusk, all are the imagery is captured into words put to music. Khayal was popularized by Niyamat Khan, both in the court of Muhammad Shah Rangile. It could be said that Khayal existed at some point in India, but it got fused in this present form with the Persian influence. Thumri. Now that is considered a semi-classical genre, but it's an extremely fun and popular genre, frequently used in the latter half of the present-day concerts. Thumri originated in eastern part of Uttar Pradesh. Its most distinct feature is the playful, sensuous manner of portraying lives and loves of Lord Krishna and Radha. The real beauty of Thumri lies in the artist's ability to convey musically many shades and meanings of the words as a song, many shades of meanings in a word as the song can bear. It's much freer form than khayal. Gharanas I will take when I'm discussing the Hindustani music concert format. Dhwani, next slide. I wish I could have invited this group of artists for a concert. What a wide orbit of craft and classicism they stood for. D.K. Patamal, along with her contemporaries M.S. Subbalakshmi and M.L. Vasantakumari, they are popularly referred to as the female trinity of Carnatic music. This trio initiated the entry of women into mainstream Carnatic music. D.K. Patamal started a few revolutionary trends in Carnatic music. She was the first Brahmin woman to have performed this genre of music publicly. Brahmins ranked as the highest in the caste hierarchy prevalent in India in the early 20th century, and society considered it a taboo for women to perform on stage. She broke that. D.K. Patamal's knowledge was encyclopedic. She was considered an authority on all of Muthuswami Dikshitar's compositions and is really known for its rendering. Bade Ghulam Ali Khan, one of the most radical singers of Khayal Gayaki, and innovated contrary to his tradition, particularly in the time he lived in. He did confer that the beauty and the strength of Gayaki lay in leisurely improvisations, but he believed that the audience would not appreciate long alaps. Hence, his rag expositions were brief and he loved to woo the audience. The director of movie Mughal-e-Azam, K. Asif, was so enamored by his larger-than-life towering presence that he wooed him to sing for the movie. He finally did sing two songs, Prem Jogan Banke and Shubh Din Ayo. Both were included in the film. Begum Akhtar. Akhtari Bai Faizabadi, was also known as Begum Akhtar, had an extremely difficult personal life, and in her art she connected with her being. She sang Thumri in a semi-classical genre. She gave it the verve of deep classicism with the rigidity of her riyaz, ensuring her Thumri showed the range from simple to complex gayaki based on the rag grammar. Semengudi Srinivas Iyer. He grew up in a small town in Tamil Nadu, soaking in the culture of temples, processions, prayers. In his early years, actually, his voice gave him a lot of trouble and he was advised to give up singing. He pursued and made sure that he was heard and was on concert stage till 92. It was his belief that a concert artist should perform in such a way that each person in the audience should comprehend and appreciate the music. His words on Carnatic music are what Renan Martin are to English grammar. Next slide, Dhwani. So we touched on melody, swara, raga, lyrics. We now see how rhythm enters the configuration. A musical truism is Shruti Mata, Laya Pita. Shruti is the mother and Laya the father, shows the sanctity of the union of melody and rhythm. In its simplest definition, Laya denotes the interval of time between the beats and movement in time. Tala is a cyclic way of observing that laya. Each cycle is then divided into segments. In a performance, the percussionist as well as the melodic soloist has to keep track of all the measurements and subdivisions pertaining to a given tala. The soloist has to sound an important note of the rag as both the percussionist and soloist culminate at a correct beat. It's fairly a visual affair, as you can spot both musicians and audiences will be seen to nod and clap when that desired beat is met. In a performance, the artist could use vilambit, that is a slow-paced tal, a madhyam, that is a medium paced, or a drut laya based on the composition. Next slide, please. In the slide where I mentioned about the lyrics, here is where the compositional architecture comes together. If you see the slide, there's the melodic flow. You have the rhythm divisions, which we are going to now get a demonstration. And each of the words has its own rhythm, the way it is pronounced. Next slide, please, Dhani. I'd like you to hear a rendering of Sollu Kottu by N. Sasidharan. He's an artist in the troupe of Dr. Yesudas. What you see on the screen are just a practice reckoner. If this were a live session, you would have been given these sheets to participate and clap as the bowl or the Sollu Kottu of the rhythm beat cycles are rendered. Shashi will render the Aditalam and the Mishra Chapu. Dhwani, just a rider, there are 2 slides. I'll tell you when to play. Play the first track.
The first tala, Adi tala, 8 beats. I will recite the first speed, second speed, and the third speed. Tat dim dim na taka dim na taka dim na krataka dim na tat dim na taka dim na taka din na krataka din na tat dim da taka dim da ram din na krataka din na tat din na taka din da naka din na taka din tat din na taka din na naka din na taka din na tat din takadim din da nakadim din na takadim din tatim din na nakadim din na takadim din na nakadim din tatim din na takadim din na nakadim din na katatim din na tatim din na nakadim din na katatim din na takadim din tatim din na takadim din na nakadim din na katatim din tatim din na nakadim din na tatim din na nakadim din tatim din na takadim din tatom tatim din na takadim din tatom tatim din na nakadim din tatom.
Play the second track.
The next tala is a very softer one, 7 beats. Misra Chapu Talam. Takkitta, takka, dimbe, takkitta, takka, jando, 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 takkitta, takka, dimbe, takkitta, takka, takkitta, takka, dimbe, takkitta, takka, jando, takkitta, takka, di, takkitta, takka, jando, takkitta, takka, di, takkitta, takka, takkitta, takka, dimbe, takkitta, takka, jando, 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 takkitta, takka, dimbe, takkitta, takka, takkitta, takka, dimbe, takkitta, takka, jando, 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 takkitta, takka, di, takkitta, takka, jando, taditta, kedatake tari kedadom, tatitta, kedatake tari kedadom, kedatake tatitta, kedatake tari kedadom.
The next slide, Dhwani. Sur or Tal, lyrics and beat come together. We have Dr. Tanvi Goswami, a student of Devashish Day. She will render a bandish, a melodic composition in Rag Bhairavi in Ek Tal. So you have the music, the lyrics, and the beat all coming together. Dhwani, please play the track.
मंत्रयंत्र यज्ञदान गहन
साधना के ये सोपान साकार सगुण ज्योत.
Next slide, Dhvani. If there is expressions, non-verbal syntax, if one thing I had the power to change, I would love to change the lexicon in the word accompanying artist. The implication just puts a sense of hierarchy. As a volunteer for 3 decades with Spick McKay, I can say firmly with conviction that the accompanying artists are master storytellers and carry a wealth of information. They are veterans of performing in many concerts with varied soloists and have such a ringside view of the main arena. As artists, they truly enhance the concert. So there was a concept, we had melody, rhythm, and harmony. It is said that in Indian classical music, it does not lend itself to Western notion of harmony. Scholars opine that there is harmony that scholars who are in the Indian tradition opine that there is harmony when voice, percussion, and drone of the tanpura all come together. That's a matter of opinion. True expression of harmony we can see when we get Dr. Tanvi to render a film song. So a Hindustani concert would have an artist as an accompanying artist, would have an artist on the tanpura tuned to the relevant pitch, a harmonium artist, and a tabla player. In a Dhrupad concert, it would usually be a pakhavach player instead of a tabla and sarangi instead of tanpura. In the Carnatic concert, the melodic accompaniment would be a violinist, the percussion would be performed by the pridangam and could be joined by an artist on the ghatam, and the tanpura provides the drone. The contemporary stage today are stamped with some technological changes like the Shruti box and the tanpura. While technology and its impact on music teaching and training is a conversation for another day, there is no escaping that technology is here to stay. Dhvani, next slide. I did mention that I will not be expanding on this segment as I mentioned earlier, but do want to just state 2 points. For a considerable part of the history of music, the human voice was considered to be the supreme force in the performing spaces. There's no denying the potency of the voice, and this is true of the Indian tradition and was true world over. As instrumental musicians got solo performances, the world is now affluent with a plethora of sounds. You see the slide. Look at the way the instruments are constructed from natural elements like pumpkin, wood, clay, and then embellished. They are like magic wands in sounds. They're like magic sound wands, you know. You look at the center of the slide. There's a lovely comment by Robert Greenberg, a composer and a music historian, who makes a fervent case for instrumental music by saying, beyond say it, play it. It is the most abstract of the arts and it needs to exist. The second quote is by Alex Ross, the music writer and the critic for New Yorker, who says, music is too personal a medium to support an absolute hierarchy of values. The best music is that music that persuades us there is no other music. This sort of sums up my point. Dhvani, next slide. My tribute to instrumental masters, Pandit Ravi Shankar, Ustad Vilayat Khan Sahab, Lalgudi Jairam. Next slide. Percussion maestros, Balghat Mani Iyer, Ustad Allah Rakha Khan, Ustad Zakir Khan Hussain. Next slide. It's concert time. This is where all the vectors discussed come together at the concert. It could be a stage, a temple, a courtyard. A concert is about performance, rendering, musical conversations, ebb and flow of artistic energy, recognition of something heard. There are ways to approach it. One, just to go with the flow of the music. to engage in a conversation at a subliminal way. The other way is to be subcutaneous with a deeper lens to understand the structure, whatever floats the boat. The Carnatic segment, the Carnatic segment has done a lot of formatting, has been done. The vocalist Arekudi Iyengar in the 1900s pioneered the format. The artist and the stage both give bhakti to the old masters. It is the performer's choice to go with the padhati or the rules or to innovate. A city like Chennai in December season hosts over 3 to 4,000 concerts. The concert sheet almost reads like an evil Sudoku. So if you look at your slide, this is like a concert reckoner. I mentioned what the composers composed, which is the kriti. If you look, it's very tightly packed, which reflects how the concert in Carnatic traditions normally go. So normally you could pick up, say, a varnam, which is a composition consisting of short metric pieces. You could the artist could choose to do a kriti, which is a format of musical composition. Now, under the kriti, you have a pallavi, which is a thematic line, and it goes into detailing. So this is what, it depends again on the artist. This is a framework, but it completely depends on the artist what and how he would like to move on. Next slide. Like the Carnatic concerts, practicing musicians in the Hindustani traditions bring their style of gaigi, parampara, gharana aesthetics to the performance arena. Now, the gharana system I did want to bring here, it does not retain its earlier form. The word gharana comes from the word ghar. It typically refers to a place where the musical ideology originated. There is no concept of the gharana in the Carnatic tradition. Musicologists believe that a gharana should have existed within the family for some generations. A distinct style is followed, which is discernible and distinguishable. It's not essential for an only family member to be a part of the gharana. This has changed because, given the fluidity of interactions over time, practicing musicians could well retain the gharana style or forge it with other influences. If again you look at the slide, this is again a concert reckoner, a Dhrupad concert, a sitar concert would have a little differences. The details I've put here is for a khayal concert. So you could begin, the artist could begin with an alap, which is an exposition of the rag without the rhythm, move to performing a bandish, which is a tight lyric. Bandish has 3-4 stages of, all these stages are for raga exploration. You have the sthai, the first section of the composition usually consisting of notes in the middle register, what I'd mentioned earlier about the mandra saptak, I'd mentioned about the two divisions of the ragas. It could be a bada khayal, it could be a chota khayal. One of the things that artists love to do is a jugalbandi, because that, it sort of livens up the audience. But this entire formatting is where the artist comes on the stage with his body of work, with his grammar, with his understanding, and then Indian classical music is about improvisation. It is about what you do with the rag, with your knowledge on the center stage. Next slide. Purists and syncretism. These two works of art, for me, manifest the ethos of Indian classical music. To the right is a painting originally painted for the Maharaja of Mysore in 1889 by Raja Ravi Verma, titling the painting Galaxy of Musicians. The galaxy comprised of an all-women ensemble, including a courtesan belonging to the faith of Islam, as well as a lady from the Nair community holding a veena. To the left is a Rajasthani miniature painting. The artist is unknown. This painting shows reverence of the Emperor Akbar going to visit Tansen's guru, Swami Haridas, and he's moved by the bhava of the music. This remains one of the best images for a student of classical music. Dhwani, next slide. Now, musical migrations. Music has always been migrating from its point of origin to its point of destinations. I'm often asked whether either of the two Indian or classical traditions have similarities with the Western tradition. Indian classical music is primarily homophonic, which means its focus is on melodies creating using sequence of notes. Western music, which was the Baroque music, was polyphonic, which later gets changed during the classical period. But you know, the seven notes truly belong to the world. And there have been fantastic collaborations using the combinations of the seven notes, and what might seem as parallels converge and intersect through artistic endeavors. George Harrison, in his association with Pandit Ravi Shankar, wove in Indian classical music streams in his song Within You, Without You. The song follows the pitches of the Khamajt heart and the Mixolydian mode. The song even has an alap and a tanpura drone. There was a session that I curated for Thumaris for a global audience, and the song list included a few songs by the feisty and the legendary Gohar Jan. She was India's first performer to record music on 78 RPM discs in India. She sung in languages from Gujarati, Marathi, Arabic, French, and the members of the audience, this was an entirely global audience, they could relate to the parts of the melody, not the whole song, but parts of the melody embedded in her composition with songs from their country. Rags like Mand, Pilu, Jhinjhoti have moved from folk. So music has always had these migrations. Dhwani, the next slide. So Rag Jhinjhoti came from folk to classical music, and now we will render its rendering in cinema. Rag Jhinjhoti, the song is Muse Chhal, the bandish is composed by Ratan Jhankarji, it's rendered by Tanvi. Dhwani, play the first track. The gist of the composition is that just a piece of wood touched by Lord Krishna and who plays his music just becomes a musical instrument for the gopikas. Dhwani, please play the next song.
मुझसे छल किए जाए, हरे हाय हाय रे देखो सैया बेईमान, मुझसे छल किए जाए, हरे हाय हाय रे देखो सैया समझा कि मैं तुम्हारी धमकाया देने कारी, रे 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 गा गा मामा पापा धनी सा सा सा, समझा कि मैं तुम्हारी धमकाया देने कारी, और करूँ भी क्या देखो मोरा जियरा तरसाए, जियरा तरसाए, अरे हाय हाय रे देखो सैया बेईमान, मुझसे छल किए जाए, अरे हाय हाय रे देखो सैया बेईमान.
Dhwani, next slide. Many ponder if classical music is on fade-out zone. We commence this conversation with reference to the origins being traced to 1500. There are times it's been in focus, sometimes it recedes to being a silhouette, but even in its silhouette, the image of classicism is sharp. Let's take a look at the continuum and how the river flows. I'm going to play a recording made for us by Indian Raga, the brainchild of Sriram Imani. He provides a platform for aspiring artists to collaborate and perform across 40 countries. The video is a medley of renderings. The vibrant musicians offer traditional compositions, reimagining the context, merge ancient grammar with current musical strands. I end on this hope. Do watch this video. Dhwani, please play the video.
pamaga dido, a deer, a female deer. Pa, ga pamagadiga, magadi sagadi, maga pamagapa, pamagadi sagadi. A drop of golden sun. Gama pada nisa, sari sani ga pada, pama pada sa, sani ga pa, magari sa, ni sari.
आए अभी और आते ही जाने के ढूंढता काहे बहाने जाओ 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 ना मैं बोलूं तो से जाओ 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 ना मैं बोलूं तो से
Dhwani, next slide. You are the music while the music lasts. T.S. Eliot. My sincere apologies for all the latency at my end for sitting in Bangalore, but it's a virtual world. Thank you for engaging and stay safe.
Thank you so much, Sadhana. It was such a wonderful experience. I know you've taken such a mammoth task and condensed it into a 1 hour, 15-minute presentation. It's kudos to you. There are so many questions.
It was putting a mighty river in one tiny bottle.
Well, you did a great job, if it's any consolation.
Please send me all the questions. I promise you in a week. Thank you to everybody for registering. And as I had to condense 2 big art forms, so I promise, give me a week's time and I will personally write. I did try whatever was coming and I was sort of following the messages just in case there was a technical glitch. And then I said, okay, let me just move the session from point A to point B. Sorry?
There's one question which is a great next step for you. Is they ask, can you give a reference for a book or books that you can read that furthers your understanding of appreciating and understanding Indian classical music? So I think that's the next step for you now in Artlinks. We need a book.
But right away, I'd like to mention 2 books. There's a beautiful book called Southern Aesthetic by T.M. Krishna. You must read that. There's a book called called Naad by Subroto Bagchi. Rajiv Nair for Hindustani, for Khayal Gayaki, Deepak Raja, and for to do Hindustani and Karnataka, I think, yeah, I'll write the book.
Wonderful.
Hopefully 19 years in Chennai, 20 years in Delhi. So I will write the book.
So hopefully in the post-COVID world, you let Avid do the book launch for you in Bombay. And if not, virtual world for sure. Yes. But thank you so much for sharing your impressive knowledge. And it was so insightful. And, what a wonderful presentation. And, I just want to tell the audience, we've known Sadhana for a while at Avid. I mean, she's been a great contributor, a friend, a supporter. I mean, she's actually spoke at the FICCI conference in Mumbai on Art City, Smart Cities, and Avid and me and Sadhana. We actually curated a conference in Bangalore together, which was just... it was such a learning and sharing experience, such fun that, this was the immediate next step. It happened a little late, inside a year, but still. But thank you so much for doing this. And we are there's going to be lots more collaborations happening. A special thank you to the Royal Opera House for collaborating with us. And we need to get you to the Opera House to do something, when the normal times return. Thank you, participants. And, I hope you'll have gained some fascinating insight and come a step closer to your musical journeys, personal musical journeys. Stay tuned for more information on Avid programs. Our next program, we've got actually very interesting programs coming up. So next Thursday, we have this session on computational poetry, technology, collaboration, and the future poetry with an Israeli poet, Iran Hadass, following which we have a session on fantasy architecture with Mustafa Dalbi on the 8th of October, and many, many more. If you're part of the Avid list and would like to get more information, either follow us on social media, just stalk us. We stalk everybody anyway, or just visit our website at www.avidlearning.in. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and remember that learning never stops. Have a wonderful evening and the rest of the weekend. Good night. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.